The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, as Olivia James stood motionless before the small wooden cross, her black mourning dress billowing gently in the morning breeze. The cemetery of Leadville, Colorado, lay quiet in 1876, save for the occasional call of a mountain bluebird and the soft weeping of a mother who had lost her most precious treasure. She knelt, placing a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the mountainside against the marker that bore the name Emma James, beloved daughter, 1870–1875. From his position at the wrought iron cemetery gate, Owen Lawson observed with a familiar ache in his chest. His weathered hat was clutched respectfully in his calloused hands, his tall frame leaning against the stone pillar that supported the gate. Each Sunday for the past 3 months, he had witnessed this same ritual, a ritual that spoke of a pain he recognized all too well. The silver mining boom had brought them both to Leadville, though under vastly different circumstances. Olivia had arrived with her husband and daughter, following promises of prosperity in this bustling mountain town that now housed over 10,000 souls seeking their fortunes. Owen had come alone, seeking not silver but escape from memories that haunted him across the plains of Texas. As Olivia rose from her knees, she brushed the dirt from her skirt with trembling hands. She had not spoken to the silent cowboy who always waited by the gate during her visits, though she had noticed him. In a town where most miners and cowboys showed little respect for a widow's grief, his quiet reverence stood out like a lone pine on the prairie. Today, however, something changed. Perhaps it was the weight of 5 consecutive days working at Harrington's General Store, or the gnawing loneliness that had become her constant companion. But Olivia found herself walking not toward town, but toward the silent sentinel at the gate. "You've been here every Sunday," she said, her voice barely audible above the rustling aspen leaves. Owen shifted uncomfortably, placing his hat back atop his sandy brown hair. "Yes, madam. I hope I haven't disturbed your time with your little one." Olivia studied him, the sun-weathered face that suggested a man in his early 30s, the kind blue eyes that held their own stories of loss. "You haven't," she replied, "but I wonder why you come." Owen's gaze drifted beyond her to the small grave. "I lost someone too," he said simply. "A daughter, back in Texas." The admission hung in the mountain air between them, a shared understanding that needed no further explanation. "Would you walk with me back to town, mister?" She let the question hang, suddenly realizing she had approached a man whose name she didn't even know. "Lawson, Owen Lawson," he replied, offering a small, gentle smile, "and I'd be honored to escort you, Mrs. James, Olivia James." As they walked the dirt path leading from the hillside cemetery toward the bustling main street of Leadville, an unspoken connection formed between them, a bond forged in grief that neither had expected to find in this silver-hungry town. The following Sunday, Olivia found Owen waiting at the cemetery gate as usual. This time, he held not only his hat but also a small bunch of columbines, the delicate blue state flower of Colorado. "For Emma," he said, extending the flowers as Olivia approached. "If you don't mind." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she accepted the offering. "How did you know her name?" "I read it on the marker," Owen admitted. "I hope that's not presumptuous of me." Olivia shook her head, touched by the gesture. "Not at all, would you? Would you like to come with me today?" "To meet her properly." Owen nodded, and together they walked to Emma's grave. As Olivia arranged the columbines alongside her own wildflowers, she began to speak. "She was 5 when the fever took her. My husband, Thomas, had already passed the year before in a mining accident. Emma was all I had left." Her voice wavered but remained steady. "She loved to dance, Even before she could walk properly, she would bounce in my arms whenever she heard music. Owen knelt beside her, his own memories surfacing. My Sarah was 4. Fell from a horse that got spooked by a rattlesnake. My wife couldn't bear it, left for her sisters in St. Louis a month later. The simplicity of his telling revealed the depth of his pain. 2 parents, their lives hollowed out by loss, finding themselves side by side in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. "How do you bear it?" Olivia asked, her green eyes searching his face for the answer that had eluded her for months. "One day at a time, Mrs. James," Owen replied, his gaze meeting hers. "And some days not even that, just one breath after another." They remained by Emma's grave until the church bells in town rang out for morning service. As they walked back together, the silence between them was comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that neither had experienced since their losses. Upon reaching the boarding house, where Olivia rented a small room, Owen removed his hat once more. "Mrs. James, I know it might not be proper, but I'd be honored if you'd join me for supper at the Silver Dollar Cafe tomorrow evening, just as friends who understand each other." Olivia hesitated, aware of the town's penchant for gossip. A widow dining with a man who wasn't family would certainly set tongues wagging. Yet something about Owen's sincere expression and the shared pain in his eyes made her nod. "6 o'clock," she said. "And please call me Olivia." "Olivia," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Until tomorrow, then." The Silver Dollar Cafe sat nestled between the assayer's office and a haberdashery on Harrison Avenue, Leadville's main thoroughfare. Despite the town's rough reputation, the cafe maintained a semblance of refinement, with checkered tablecloths and actual glass windows, a luxury in a town where many establishments still used oiled paper. Owen arrived early, having splurged on a haircut and a new shirt collar at Dunham's barbershop. He selected a table near the back, away from the windows and prying eyes of passers-by. When Olivia entered, she wore a dress of deep blue, not the black he had grown accustomed to seeing her in. "You look lovely," he said as he stood to greet her, pulling out her chair. "Thank you," Olivia replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. This was Emma's favorite color, I thought. It might be time. Owen nodded, understanding the significance of the small change. "It suits you well." They ordered beef stew and fresh bread, a luxury in the mountain town where most food had to be shipped in at considerable expense. As they ate, their conversation flowed more easily than either had expected. Owen told Olivia of his cattle ranch in Texas, of how he'd sold it after losing Sarah and his wife leaving. He'd headed west with no particular destination in mind, working as a ranch hand and occasional deputy, until the silver boom had drawn him to Colorado. "I'm no miner," he explained, breaking a piece of bread. "But there's work for men who can handle horses and cattle. The mining companies need supplies brought up from Denver, and the town needs beef." Olivia shared how she'd come to Leadville with Thomas, an accountant who'd been hired by one of the larger silver mining operations. After his death in a shaft collapse, she'd stayed on, unable to afford the journey back east to her family in Pennsylvania. "Harrington gave me work at his store," she explained. "It's not what I imagined for myself, but I'm grateful for it." As the evening progressed, they found themselves sharing memories of their children's stories that had remained locked away, too painful to voice until now. They laughed about Emma's determination to catch a chipmunk in the garden, and Sarah's insistence on wearing her father's hat around the ranch. When Owen walked Olivia back to her boarding house, the mountain air had grown chilly. Without comment, he removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," Olivia said as they reached her door. "It's been I haven't spoken of Emma so freely since she passed. It felt good to remember the joy, not just the loss. Owen's expression softened. That's how they stay with us, I reckon, in the telling of their stories. Their parting was proper a tip of his hat, a gentle good night, but something fundamental had shifted. In a town built on the promise of silver, they had discovered something far more precious, the possibility that life might still hold moments of connection and understanding. The following Sunday found them both at the cemetery as usual, but now they arrived together, Owen carrying a small wooden toy horse he'd carved during the week. "For Emma," he said, placing it at the base of the cross. "Every little one should have something to play with." Olivia's heart swelled at the gesture. She would have loved this. After their visit, they took to walking along the edge of town, where the bustling streets gave way to pine forests and mountain meadows. Despite the propriety they maintained in public, rumors began to circulate through Leadville about the widow and the cowboy. Olivia felt the whispers and stares as she worked at Harrington's, arranging bolts of fabric and tallying purchases in the ledger. Mrs. Peterson, the wife of the bank manager, made her disapproval particularly clear one Tuesday morning. "A woman in mourning has responsibilities to her position," she remarked loudly while selecting buttons. "Certain behaviors reflect poorly on all respectable ladies in town." Olivia's hands trembled as she wrapped Mrs. Peterson's purchase in brown paper. "I assure you, Mrs. Peterson, I've done nothing to dishonor my husband's memory or my daughter's." "See that you don't," the older woman sniffed, accepting her package. "This town has enough loose morals without widows forgetting themselves." That evening, as Olivia sat alone in her small room, tears of frustration and anger streaked her face. When a soft knock came at her door, she was surprised to find Harriet Sullivan, the boarding house owner's wife, standing there with a cup of tea. "Pay no mind to the likes of Agnes Peterson," Harriet said, setting the tea beside Olivia. "That woman's tongue is sharper than a miner's pick and twice as destructive. But people are talking," Olivia sighed, "about Mr. Lawson and me." Harriet settled her ample frame into the room's single chair. "Of course they are. This town runs on two things: silver and gossip. But I've watched you these past months, wasting away with grief. Now there's color in your cheeks again." She reached over to pat Olivia's hand. "Your Thomas wouldn't begrudge you finding a friend who understands your loss." Olivia sipped the tea, drawing comfort from Harriet's kindness. "He's a good man, Harriet, respectful and kind." "Then that's all that matters," Harriet declared, rising to leave. "The rest will sort itself out in time." When Olivia told Owen about Mrs. Peterson's comments during their Sunday walk the following week, his jaw tightened visibly. "I won't be the cause of difficulty for you," he said, his voice low. "Perhaps we should be more cautious in public." Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The aspen grove they had wandered into cast dappled shadows across his concerned features. "Is that what you want?" she asked. To step back, Owen removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to spend time with you without causing you harm. What I want is to see you smile more often. What I want." He trailed off, seemingly unable to voice the rest. Olivia took a step closer. "What is it that you want, Owen?" His blue eyes met hers, unguarded for the first time since they'd met. "I want to know if there might be a future where we both hurt a little less, together." The words hung between them, a tentative bridge across their shared grief toward something new and uncertain. "I think," Olivia said carefully, "that I would like to explore that possibility." The smile that spread across Owen's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, with reverence, he reached out to take her hand in his, their first real touch beyond the occasional steadying arm. His calloused fingers entwined with hers, and in that simple connection, a promise took root. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Owen and Olivia's courtship progressed with careful steps. They continued their Sunday ritual at Emma's grave, but now also attended church services together afterward. They shared meals at the Silver Dollar Cafe and took walks when weather permitted. For Olivia's 31st birthday in late October, Owen surprised her with a picnic in a sheltered meadow south of town. Despite the chill in the air, the sun shone brightly as he spread a blanket and unpacked a basket containing fried chicken, cornbread, and a small jar of precious preserves. "This is wonderful," Olivia said, surveying the spread. "I can't remember the last time I celebrated my birthday." "Every year you're here is worth celebrating," Owen replied, pouring her a cup of coffee from his thermos. As they ate, Owen seemed increasingly nervous, fidgeting with his cup and repeatedly clearing his throat. "Is something wrong?" Olivia finally asked. Owen set down his coffee and reached into his pocket. "No, nothing's wrong, just, I've been wanting to give you something." He extended his hand, opening his palm to reveal a silver brooch in the shape of a columbine. "I had Mr. Reynolds the silversmith make it. For you to remember Emma by, but also—" He hesitated. To mark a new beginning, perhaps. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she accepted the exquisite piece. "It's beautiful, Owen." "There's more," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been offered a position as foreman at the Thompson Creek Ranch. It's about 5 miles outside of town with a proper house. The owner's moving back east for his wife's health." Olivia looked up from the brooch. "Owen, that's wonderful news." "It comes with good pay and a future," he continued. "A future I've been thinking might include you if you were willing." Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Owen took her hands in his. "Olivia James, I know we've both loved and lost. I know we carry our grief with us and always will. But I've found something with you I never thought to find again, hope. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, sharing that house and whatever future lies ahead." Olivia's heart raced as she looked into the face of this man who had waited patiently at the cemetery gate, who had understood her pain without demanding she set it aside, who had shown her that love could grow even in the shadow of loss. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Lawson." His face transformed with joy as he leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on her lips there first. It was a kiss of promise, of comfort, of a future neither had believed possible 6 months earlier. News of their engagement spread quickly through Leadville, while some, like Mrs. Peterson, continued to mutter about propriety and proper mourning periods. Many more offered congratulations. Harriet Sullivan organized a small gathering at the boarding house, where the women of Olivia's church presented her with hand-embroidered linens and kitchen towels for her new home. Even Mr. Harrington, normally stern and businesslike, showed his approval. "You've been my most reliable clerk, Mrs. James," he said, presenting her with a set of silver spoons as an engagement gift. "While I'll be sorry to lose you at the store, I'm pleased to see you finding happiness again." The date for the wedding was set for December 15th, allowing time for Owen to prepare the ranch house and for Olivia to sew a new dress. Not black, not even the dark blue she had worn in transition, but a warm burgundy wool that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. 2 weeks before the wedding, the first major snowstorm of the season descended on Leadville. The town, accustomed to harsh mountain winters, continued functioning despite 3 feet of snow blanketing the streets. Owen, having stayed late at the ranch to ensure the cattle were properly sheltered, found himself fighting his way back to town through dangerous drifts. When he failed to arrive for their planned supper, Olivia paced her small room anxiously. By morning, with no word and the storm continuing to rage, her worry had turned to fear. She bundled herself against the cold and made her way to the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Morgan was organizing a search party. "The Thompson Creek area got hit hardest," the sheriff explained, marking a map spread across his desk. "We've had reports of a few stranded travelers already. Don't worry, Mrs. James. Lawson knows these mountains. If anyone can survive out there, it's him." Despite the sheriff's assurances, Olivia couldn't calm the dread that had settled in her chest. "I want to go with the search party," she declared. Sheriff Morgan shook his head firmly. "No place for a woman out there, madam. Best thing you can do is wait here in town. We'll bring him back." Reluctantly, Olivia returned to the boarding house, where Harriet set her to work in the kitchen kneading bread dough to keep her hands busy. "Working the dough is good for fretting," the older woman advised. "Puts all that worry energy somewhere useful." Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Olivia shaped loaf after loaf, her mind filled with terrible visions of Owen lying injured or worse in the merciless cold. When the back door burst open late that afternoon, bringing a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air, she nearly dropped the pan she was holding. Sheriff Morgan stomped snow from his boots, his expression grim. "Mrs. James, we found his horse about 2 miles from the ranch. No sign of Lawson, but we did find tracks leading toward Miller's old trapping cabin. And," Olivia's voice was barely audible, "storm got too bad to follow them. Had to turn back. We'll head out again at first light if the weather breaks." Olivia set down the bread pan with deliberate care. "Where is this cabin?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Now, Mrs. James, I know what you're thinking and it's out of the question. That cabin's in rough country. We don't even know if he made it there." "Where is the cabin?" she repeated, her voice firm. Seeing her determination, Sheriff Morgan sighed. "About 3 miles northwest of where we found the horse, up near Timberline. But it's a fool's errand to try reaching it now, especially alone." "Then I won't go alone," Olivia declared, already untying her apron. "Mr. Sullivan has horses in his stable, and I'll need someone who knows the way." Despite the sheriff's continued protests and Harriet's tearful pleas, Olivia remained resolute. By sundown, she had convinced James Kelly, a young Irish miner who had worked as a guide before finding silver, to lead her to the trapping cabin. Equipped with lanterns, blankets, and supplies, they set out into the fading light. The journey was brutal. Wind-driven snow stung Olivia's face, despite the scarf wrapped around all but her eyes. The horses struggled through drifts that sometimes reached their chests, forcing Kelly and Olivia to dismount and lead them through the worst patches. "We should turn back, Mrs. James," Kelly shouted over the wind after they'd been traveling for nearly 2 hours. "We'll never find it in the dark." "Just a little further," Olivia insisted, though her limbs ached with cold and fatigue. "Please, Mr. Kelly." As if in answer to her determination, a momentary break in the clouds allowed moonlight to illuminate the landscape. There, not 500 yards ahead, stood a small cabin, a faint glow visible through its single window. "There," she cried, pointing. "Someone's there." They pushed forward with renewed energy, reaching the cabin's door as the clouds closed again, plunging them back into darkness. Kelly pounded on the wooden door, which swung open to reveal a startled man holding a rifle, not Owen, but an elderly trapper with a long gray beard. "What in tarnation are you doing out in this blow?" he demanded, lowering his weapon when he saw Olivia. "We're looking for a man who might have taken shelter here," Kelly explained as they entered the cramped, warm space. "Tall fellow, sandy hair, cowboy from town." The old man nodded toward a corner of the cabin, where Owen lay on a makeshift pallet, his face pale. a bloodied bandage wrapped around his left thigh. "Owen!" Olivia rushed to his side, falling to her knees beside him. His eyes flickered open at her voice, confusion giving way to recognition. "Olivia, how did you?" His voice was weak, his skin hot with fever. "Fool tried crossing Miller's Creek where the ice wasn't solid," the trapper explained. "Found him dragging himself through the snow, horse gone, leg gashed open on the rocks. Brought him back here, did what I could for the wound, but he needs a doctor." Kelly examined Owen's leg and grimaced. "That's going septic. We need to get him back to town tonight." The journey back to Leadville was a nightmare of cold, fear, and desperate hope. They fashioned a travois to pull behind Kelly's horse, binding Owen to it as securely as possible. The old trapper, who introduced himself as Ezekiel Porter, insisted on accompanying them, leading the way with uncanny certainty despite the darkness and continuing snowfall. Halfway back, Owen's fever spiked dangerously. When they stopped briefly to check on him, he was delirious, muttering about Sarah and calling for Olivia even as she held his hand. "Stay with me, Owen," she pleaded, wiping his brow with snow to cool the fever. "We're almost home. Please stay with me." It was near midnight when they finally reached Leadville. Dr. Wilson, roused from his bed, immediately recognized the severity of Owen's condition. "Infection's set in bad," he said after examining the wound. "I'll need to clean it thoroughly, maybe take some tissue. And pray the fever breaks." For 3 days, Olivia barely left Owen's bedside in the small room behind Dr. Wilson's surgery. She bathed his brow, spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and whispered promises of their future together when the delirium took him back to darker places. On the morning of the 4th day, she awoke from an uncomfortable doze in the bedside chair to find Owen watching her, his blue eyes clear for the first time since they'd found him. "You came for me," he said, his voice rough but present. Tears of relief sprang to Olivia's eyes. "Of course I did." Owen's hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Marry me, not next week. Now." "Owen, you're still recovering. I nearly died out there," he interrupted. "All I could think about was you and how I might never see you again. I don't want to wait another day if I don't have to, Doctor." Wilson, entering to check on his patient, overheard the exchange. "The fever's broken, and the wound's finally showing signs of healing," he noted, examining Owen's leg. "Still, you'll need at least a week of bed rest before you should even think about standing at an altar." "Then bring the preacher here," Owen insisted. "If Mrs. James is willing." Olivia looked from Owen to the doctor, who shrugged. "I've seen stranger things. The man's been through hell and back. If a bedside wedding will help his recovery, I've no objection as his physician." 3 days later, with Owen propped up against pillows and wearing a clean shirt borrowed from Dr. Wilson, Reverend Thomas of the Leadville Methodist Church performed a simple ceremony in the recovery room. Harriet Sullivan stood as Olivia's witness, while Sheriff Morgan stood for Owen. Olivia wore her burgundy dress, completed in haste during the nights at Owen's bedside. A small bouquet of dried columbines, preserved from the summer and tied with a blue ribbon, served as her bridal flowers. "I, Owen Lawson, take you, Olivia James, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice stronger than it had been since his rescue. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Olivia repeated her vows with tears glistening in her eyes. The simple gold band Owen had somehow managed to procure while confined to bed now resting on her finger. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, mindful of Owen's still weakened state, but filled with promise and the quiet joy of survivors who had found their way back to life through each other. Recovery was slow but steady. By early January 1877, Owen was strong enough to be moved to their new home at Thompson Creek Ranch. The house, though modest, was solidly built of local pine, with 3 proper rooms and a kitchen that made Olivia's heart sing after years of making do with a boarding house hot plate. On their first Sunday in their new home, Owen insisted on continuing their ritual. Despite Dr. Wilson's warnings about overexertion, he saddled their horses for the ride to Leadville Cemetery. "Are you certain you're strong enough?" Olivia asked, concerned by the pallor that still occasionally shadowed his features when he pushed himself too hard. "Some things are important enough to find the strength for," he replied, helping her mount despite his still healing leg. The cemetery was peaceful under its blanket of pristine snow. Together, they cleared the accumulation from Emma's grave marker and placed a small carved wooden doll that Ezekiel Porter had sent as a wedding gift for the little one, his note had read. As they stood together in the winter silence, Owen's arm around Olivia's shoulders, he spoke softly. "I've been thinking about something. I'd like to bring Sarah here to rest near Emma. The ranch in Texas is sold, but I know where her grave is. Come spring, I could make the journey, bring her home to us." Olivia leaned into his embrace, deeply moved by the suggestion. "I think that would be wonderful. They could keep each other company. And we'd visit them together every Sunday," Owen added, "our daughters." In that moment, surrounded by winter's hush and the memory of their lost children, they found themselves looking forward with hope rather than backward with sorrow. Spring arrived late in the high country, the snows lingering into April before finally releasing their grip on the mountainsides. As promised, once the passes were clear, Owen made the journey to Texas. He returned 3 weeks later with a small coffin containing Sarah's remains, which were reinterred beside Emma in a simple, private ceremony. The 2 graves now sat side by side, their markers identical save for the names. Ezekiel Porter, who had become a frequent visitor to the ranch, crafted a small wooden fence to enclose both graves, a gesture that moved Owen and Olivia to tears. "A family plot," the old trapper said gruffly, uncomfortable with their emotional reaction. "Every family should have one. A place to remember." Life at Thompson Creek Ranch settled into a rhythm of hard work and quiet evenings. Olivia planted a garden that flourished in the brief but intense mountain summer. Owen's leg healed completely, allowing him to manage the ranch's growing herd with the help of 2 young cowboys hired for the season. When autumn came again, bringing with it their first anniversary, Olivia discovered she was expecting a child. She shared the news with Owen one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the alpenglow paint the distant peaks. "Are you certain?" he asked, his expression a mixture of joy and apprehension. Olivia nodded, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat abdomen. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We should expect a baby by late spring." Owen pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly, knowing how the memory of Emma's loss might color this new journey. "Yes," Olivia admitted, "but not enough to let fear rob us of joy. Emma and Sarah taught us that life is precious, however long or short." Throughout the winter, as Olivia's body changed to accommodate new life, they continued their Sunday visits to the cemetery. Sometimes they spoke to their daughters about the coming baby. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, tending the graves and remembering. On a bright May morning in 1878, after nearly 20 hours of labor with Harriet Sullivan and Dr. Wilson in attendance, Olivia gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Thomas Owen Lawson, honoring both Olivia's first husband and the child's father. When Thomas was 6 weeks old, they brought him to meet his sisters. It was a perfect summer day, the mountain meadows in full bloom with wildflowers. Olivia held the infant while Owen placed fresh columbines on both graves. "Emma, Sarah, this is your brother Thomas," Olivia said softly. "We wanted you to know him and for him to know about you." Owen knelt between the graves, touching each marker gently. "We'll make sure he knows all about his brave, beautiful sisters, how Emma loved to dance, and how Sarah could ride almost before she could walk." As if in response, a mountain bluebird alighted briefly on the small fence surrounding the graves before taking wing again, its brilliant color flashing in the sunlight. "Look at that," Owen said, smiling. "I think they approve." Leadville continued to grow and change around them as the silver boom reached its peak. By the time Thomas was 3, the population had swelled to over 15,000, with opera houses and fancy hotels lining Harrison Avenue. Olivia occasionally took sewing work from the town's more affluent residents, enjoying the creative outlet while contributing to the family's increasing prosperity. In the autumn of 1881, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Catherine Harriet Lawson Catherine after Owen's mother, and Harriet after the woman who had become like family to them. Unlike her brother's easy birth, Catherine's arrival was difficult, with complications that left Dr. Wilson concerned for Olivia's health. "You've been blessed with 2 healthy children," he advised after examining Olivia during her recovery. "I'd recommend against trying for more. Another pregnancy could be dangerous for you." Though the news brought some sadness, particularly for Olivia, who had imagined a larger family, they accepted the doctor's counsel with gratitude for the children they had. Their Sunday ritual evolved as Thomas and Catherine grew old enough to accompany them. The visits became family outings, with picnics near the graves and stories about the sisters the children would never meet, but came to know through their parents' memories. Thomas, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature, often brought small treasures to leave at the grave's interesting rocks, a particularly perfect pine cone, once even a robin's eggshell found intact beneath a tree. Catherine, spirited and fearless, would dance among the gravestones, instinctively fulfilling Emma's lost passion. When Thomas was 7 and Catherine 4, a spring blizzard struck unexpectedly one Saturday in late April. By Sunday morning, the snow lay 3 feet deep, making the journey to town impossible. "It's the first Sunday we've missed," Olivia said, looking out the window at the blanketed landscape, "in all these years." Owen came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "They'll understand. We'll go next week, weather permitting." That afternoon, as the storm cleared and weak sunshine broke through the clouds, Owen disappeared into his workshop. He emerged hours later with 2 perfect miniature crosses, carved from pine and polished smooth. "I thought we might bring the ritual home, just for today," he explained, setting the crosses on the kitchen table. Olivia gathered wildflowers that had somehow survived beneath the snow near the house, while the children solemnly helped prepare a small space on the sideboard. They placed the crosses side by side, adorned them with the flowers, and then, as they always did at the cemetery, shared memories and spoke to Emma and Sarah as if they could hear. "I learned to read a whole book by myself," Thomas announced proudly to the makeshift memorial. "And I can count to 20, Catherine added, not to be outdone. That night, after the children were asleep, Olivia found Owen standing at the window, gazing toward town and the cemetery beyond, though it was hidden by distance and darkness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, joining him. "About that first Sunday I saw you at Emma's grave," he replied, drawing her close. How you looked so alone and how much I wanted to ease that solitude, even though I hardly knew why at the time. Olivia rested her head against his shoulder. I remember when I finally spoke to you. I was so tired of carrying the grief alone. Something about you standing there, respectful but present. It felt like permission to start living again. We've come a long way from that cemetery gate, Owen observed, kissing the top of her head. The following Sunday, with the snow rapidly melting in the spring sunshine, they made the journey to town. As they approached the cemetery, Olivia noticed something different about their daughter's graves from a distance. "Owen, look," she said, pointing. Someone had cleared the snow from the graves and left fresh flowers, columbines, the first of the season, which normally wouldn't bloom for another month at this altitude. Who could have? Olivia began, looking around the empty cemetery. Owen smiled, a suspicion forming in his mind. "I have an idea." Later that day, they paid a visit to Ezekiel Porter's small cabin on the edge of town. The old trapper, now well into his 70s but still spry, seemed unsurprised by their arrival. "Figured you might be stuck up at the ranch with all that snow," he said gruffly. "Somebody had to look in on those little ones." Olivia embraced the startled old man, who awkwardly patted her back. "Thank you, Ezekiel. You're a true friend." "Just doing what neighbors do," he muttered, though his weathered face showed pleasure at their appreciation. As the years passed, Thompson Creek Ranch prospered under Owen's management. They added rooms to the house as their needs grew, and eventually hired a tutor for the children when the journey to Leadville school became impractical due to Thomas's increasing responsibilities on the ranch. In 1889, when Thomas was 11 and Catherine 8, the silver crash hit Leadville hard. The repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act sent the price of silver plummeting, and many of the mines closed virtually overnight. Families who had lived comfortably on mining wages suddenly found themselves destitute. "We should help however we can," Olivia said as they discussed the situation one evening. "We have plenty of food with the garden and the cattle." Owen agreed, and soon Thompson Creek Ranch became a place of refuge. They hired displaced miners for seasonal work when possible, and Olivia organized a system for distributing milk, eggs, and vegetables to families in need. One bitter December evening, a knock came at their door. Owen opened it to find a young woman holding a baby, with two small children clinging to her skirts. Her face was gaunt with hunger, her clothes too thin for the mountain winter. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "They said in town you sometimes have work or food to spare." Olivia immediately ushered the family inside, settling them near the fire while she prepared hot food. The young woman, who introduced herself as Mary Donovan, explained that her husband had been killed in a mine collapse 3 months earlier. "I've been taking in laundry, but with the crash, even the wealthy families are cutting back," she explained, watching her children eat with the desperate gratitude of a mother who had feared she might lose them to hunger. That night, after the Donovans were settled in the spare room, Owen found Olivia sitting at the kitchen table, deep in thought. "We can't solve all of Leadville's problems," he said gently, knowing her tender heart. "No," Olivia agreed, "but we can solve Mary Donovan's." The old bunkhouse could be fixed up for her and the children. She could help with the cooking and gardening. "Those little ones deserve a chance, Owen." By spring, the bunkhouse had been transformed into a cozy cottage. Mary Donovan proved to be not only grateful but resourceful, eventually taking over management of the enlarged garden and starting a small dairy operation that added to the ranch's income. She was the first, but not the last. Over the next few years, several small cabins were built on ranch property, housing families who contributed to the work and shared in its bounty. What had begun as a private refuge for two people healing from loss had expanded into a community. Through it all, Owen and Olivia maintained their Sunday ritual. As Leadville's fortunes rose and fell with the price of silver, as their own children grew toward adulthood, as their extended ranch family expanded, the cemetery visits remained a weekly reminder of the foundations upon which they had built their life together. Thomas, growing into a thoughtful young man with his father's skill with horses and his mother's compassion, often spoke of his desire to study veterinary medicine. Catherine, fiery and determined, showed an aptitude for business that surprised and delighted her parents. "They're growing up so fast," Olivia remarked one Sunday when Thomas was 16 and Catherine 13. They stood at the graves as always, but now the children were back at the ranch, Thomas helping with a difficult calving, Catherine organizing the accounts. "Too fast," Owen agreed, his hair now streaked with silver, though his eyes remained as kind and blue as the day they'd met. "But they're good children. We've been fortunate." "We have," Olivia agreed, leaning against him. At 46, she still carried herself with grace, though the years of mountain living had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth. "More fortunate than I ever imagined possible when you first saw me here." In the autumn of 1895, Thomas departed for college in Denver, the first step toward his dream of becoming a veterinarian. His absence left a palpable void at the ranch, though his letters home, filled with enthusiasm for his studies and new experiences, brought joy to his parents and sister. Catherine, now 15 and increasingly independent, had taken over much of the ranch's bookkeeping, showing a remarkable head for figures. "She gets that from her mother," Owen would say proudly, watching her balance the ledgers with confident precision. One Sunday in early June 1896, as they made their usual visit to the cemetery, Olivia noticed Owen seemed unusually reflective, even for these solemn occasions. "Is something troubling you?" she asked as they walked among the gravestones, the mountain wildflowers in full, glorious bloom around them. Owen shook his head. "Not troubled, just thinking about time and how it passes. It's been 20 years since I first saw you here." Olivia paused, calculating. "You're right. 20 years this month." They reached their daughters' graves, now bordered by a white picket fence that had replaced Ezekiel's wooden enclosure after the old trapper had passed away 3 winters ago. Owen knelt with some difficulty, his old leg wound troubling him in the changing weather, to place their usual offering of columbines. 20 years of Sundays," he mused. "Most of them right here. And you waited at the gate every time at first," Olivia added softly. Owen rose, taking her hand. "I'd wait a lifetime at that gate for you, Olivia Lawson." The words, simple but profound, echoed their journey from strangers bound by grief to partners who had built a life rich with purpose and love. What had begun as a silent vigil at a cemetery gate had blossomed into a family, a community, and a legacy of resilience. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Owen paused at the wrought iron gate. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken to me that Sunday?" Olivia squeezed his hand, the gold band on her finger catching the afternoon sunlight. "Sometimes. But then I think perhaps we were always meant to find each other, even in our grief. Perhaps Emma and Sarah somehow knew." Owen nodded, understanding perfectly, as he always did. "I like to think so too." They passed through the gate together, leaving behind the physical reminders of their losses but carrying with them, as always, the love for the daughters who had, in their absence, led their parents to each other. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose the same colors that had filled the sky on the first morning, Owen had seen Olivia at Emma's grave. Catherine joined them, carrying a letter. "It's from Thomas," she announced, handing the envelope to her mother. "Must be important. He usually doesn't write midweek." Olivia opened the letter eagerly, her eyes scanning the pages. Her expression shifted from curiosity to delight as she read. "Oh, Thomas has met a young woman at university. Her name is Elizabeth, and he sounds quite smitten. He's asking if he might bring her to visit during the summer break." Owen chuckled. "Our boy's growing up." Catherine rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I just hope she's worthy of him. Not some silly city girl who'll faint at the sight of a cow." The summer of 1896 brought Thomas home with Elizabeth Spencer, a professor's daughter with a quick mind and genuine warmth that won over even the skeptical Catherine. Their visit coincided with the 20th anniversary of Owen and Olivia's wedding, and the ranch hosted a celebration that brought together their extended family of friends, neighbors, and the workers who had found sanctuary there over the years. Mary Donovan, now the ranch's capable housekeeper, organized a feast that lasted well into the evening. Lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the house, and someone produced a fiddle, leading to dancing in the yard. As Owen and Olivia moved together to a slow waltz, their children and Elizabeth watching from the porch, Owen leaned close to his wife's ear. "I have something for you," he said, "for our anniversary." Later, when the guests had departed and the younger generation had retired for the night, Owen led Olivia to his workshop. There, covered with a cloth, stood something large. "I've been working on this for months," he explained, removing the covering to reveal an exquisite wooden rocking chair, the arms and back carved with delicate columbines. "Owen, it's beautiful," Olivia breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I thought perhaps one day we might need it for grandchildren," he said, a hopeful note in his voice. Olivia's eyes filled with tears of joy. "I'd like that very much." The following spring, Thomas and Elizabeth announced their engagement. They were married in Denver that autumn, with Owen, Olivia, and Catherine making the journey for the ceremony. Elizabeth's father, a distinguished professor of literature at the university, hosted the wedding at his comfortable home. "They remind me a bit of us," Owen observed as they watched the young couple exchange vows. "Different circumstances, of course, but the same certainty." Olivia nodded, thinking how far they had come from that first meeting at the cemetery gate. Love finds its way, even in unlikely places. 2 years later, in 1899, as the century drew to a close, Thomas and Elizabeth welcomed a son, whom they named James Owen Lawson. The rocking chair Owen had crafted found immediate use when the young family visited the ranch, Elizabeth gently soothing the infant in the handmade piece that represented so much of their family's history. Catherine, who had initially declared no interest in marriage, surprised her parents by falling in love with Michael Harrington, the son of Olivia's former employer. Having taken over his father's store, Michael had expanded it into a successful mercantile business that had survived Leadville's economic fluctuations. "He makes me laugh," Catherine explained when announcing their engagement in the spring of 1900. "And he doesn't try to tell me how to manage the accounts." Their wedding took place at Thompson Creek Ranch, the ceremony held in the meadow where Owen and Olivia had often picnicked during their courtship. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with 3 generations of family and a community that had grown from the seeds of compassion planted during the silver crash. Through the turn of the century and into its early years, Owen and Olivia watched their family expand. Thomas and Elizabeth added a daughter, Sarah Olivia, to their family in 1901. Catherine and Michael welcomed twins Emma Marie and Robert Thomas in 1903. 4 grandchildren, Owen marveled as they sat on the porch one summer evening in 1905. If someone had told me that day at the cemetery gate what lay ahead, I wouldn't have believed them. Olivia, her auburn hair now streaked liberally with silver but her green eyes as bright as ever, took his hand. Nor would I, but I'm grateful for every moment of it, even the difficult ones. Their Sunday ritual continued, though less frequently as age made the journey to town more challenging. On special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, they still visited Emma and Sarah's graves, now sometimes accompanied by grandchildren who placed wildflowers and small treasures beside the markers. Little Emma Marie, who at 6 years old showed the same love of dance that her namesake had, often twirled among the gravestones, bringing smiles rather than tears to her grandparents' faces. She would have been their aunt, Olivia once explained when young Robert asked about the girls buried there, just as they are your aunts now, watching over you from heaven. In the spring of 1910, Owen suffered a mild heart attack while working in the stables, though he recovered. Dr. Wilson's son, who had taken over his father's practice, advised a significant reduction in his physical activities. "The ranch is in good hands," Owen told Olivia as they discussed the doctor's recommendations. Thomas, who had established a veterinary practice in Leadville after completing his studies, had gradually assumed management of Thompson Creek Ranch while maintaining his professional duties in town. "Perhaps it's time we let the younger generation take the reins completely," Olivia agreed, and they settled into a quieter routine, Owen focusing on his woodworking and Olivia on her sewing and the education of their grandchildren, who often stayed at the ranch during school holidays. That autumn, during one of their now monthly visits to the cemetery, Owen suggested they sit for a while at Emma and Sarah's graves. The day was unusually warm for October, the aspen trees glowing gold against the deep blue Colorado sky. "I've been thinking," he said as they settled on a small bench they had placed near the graves years earlier, "about what happens when our time comes." Olivia squeezed his hand, understanding. At 67 and 65 respectively, they had lived full lives, but the future was increasingly finite. "I want to be buried here," Owen continued, "with our girls, and I want space left for you beside me when your time comes, so we'll all be together." "Yes," Olivia agreed simply. "That's as it should be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of light and shadow across the cemetery as clouds drifted overhead. After all the Sundays they had spent in this place, it held no fear for them, only memories and the peace of knowing that, eventually, the circle would close. 3 years later, in the bitter winter of 1913, Owen's heart finally gave out. He passed peacefully in his sleep, Olivia beside him as she had been for nearly 40 years. The funeral was held on a Sunday, the cemetery blanketed in snow just as it had been the day he had fought his way back to her through the blizzard all those years ago. As the mourners dispersed after the service, Thomas remained at his mother's side, concerned by her pale stillness. "Are you all right, Mother?" he asked gently. "You should come back to the house now. It's too cold to stay." Olivia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the 3 graves now arranged in a row: Emma, Sarah, and Owen. "You go ahead with the others. I need a few moments alone with them." Reluctantly, Thomas left her, though he waited at the cemetery gate, unwilling to leave her entirely alone in her grief. Olivia stood before the graves, memories washing over her: Emma dancing in their small garden in town, Owen waiting respectfully at the gate each Sunday, the first time he had spoken her name, their wedding in the recovery room, Thomas's birth, Catherine's arrival, the building of their community at Thompson Creek Ranch, grandchildren playing on the porch where she and Owen had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. "Thank you," she whispered to her husband's fresh grave, "for waiting at the gate, for showing me that life continues even after the deepest loss." As she finally turned to leave, she noticed Thomas at the gate standing as his father once had, waiting patiently to escort her home. The symmetry brought a sad smile to her face. "I'm ready now," she told her son, taking his offered arm. Olivia lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren at Thompson Creek Ranch. Each Sunday, weather permitting, someone from the family would accompany her to the cemetery, usually Thomas or Catherine, occasionally one of the older grandchildren. In the spring of 1918, as wildflowers began to carpet the mountainsides, Olivia James Lawson passed away in the room she had shared with Owen. Her final resting place was, as promised, beside her husband and near the daughters who had preceded them both. The legacy they left behind extended far beyond the graves that marked their physical remains. Thompson Creek Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, while Catherine's business acumen helped many Leadville establishments navigate the economic challenges following World War I. Their grandchildren grew into adults who carried forward the values of compassion, resilience, and community that Owen and Olivia had embodied. And though no one stood waiting at the cemetery gate on Sundays anymore, the story of the grieving mother and the patient cowboy became part of local lore, a testament to the healing power of love that begins in the most unexpected of places, even amid the gravestones of a mountain town cemetery. In the highest country of Colorado, where silver once drew thousands seeking fortune, a deeper treasure had been discovered by a widow and a cowboy who found, in their shared grief, a path back to joy one Sunday at a time.